Awesome. I love the chat comment, nerd bots roll out indeed. So today what we're going to learn how to do is use Django's built-in user model and use it. And this is a class, right? We're going to learn how a user can create an account, log in, log out, and persisting everything to Postgres. And so I've already done a little bit of project setup. And so let me walk through where we're at and then also start my Django server to make sure I haven't gotten anything wrong. So in our demos and notes repo, I just created a new directory named blog project. We're going to build a blog, just a basic blog. And so the features, very similar to the above, will be viewing posts, making a post, logging in, making a post while logged in, and logging out. And there's all sorts of interesting things that we can kind of add into that mix, but that's going to be the core feature set. And you all can kind of see my project structure here. I've got the main project directory for the Django project. In urls.py, I'm just pointing to the URLs py for the Django app, blog app. And I just have a very simple index view set up. If there's one silver lining from yesterday, I think it's the lesson that programming is a use it or lose it skill. You get rusty when you don't do it. And for our index view, we're rendering just a very simple homepage template. And I used a little bit of layout of Django templating, right? But we're not doing anything fancy. And the big thing that we have to do is we do have to set up and configure Postgres. So we have to change settings py to use Postgres and our desired Postgres database name. And let me double check that I've done that. So this should be correct if I haven't misspelled PostgreSQL. And if I have, someone please let me know. And the name of this database is Django_Auth. So that is one of the things that we'll have to do is we'll want to actually probably first we'll want to create the Postgres database we are going to use. And I'm going to use iTerm because I do find, for me at least, my life is a little easier using a separate terminal program. As we start to do more and more command line stuff, I'm just used to it, but you can absolutely do this in VS Code. And actually, I should probably demonstrate that because I think there's some good techniques there to be seen. So let's see here. That's not quite what I wanted. Let's do that. There we go. So this terminal, I'm going to rename to Postgres. And I'm just gonna log right in. And now I've got these two terminals here that I can go back and forth between. And I'll probably make another one for our server in a moment. And can everyone see my screen okay? Awesome. Yeah. And as our projects get more complicated, I highly recommend like just having a terminal tab open for Postgres. If you want, by the way, you can drag and drop terminal tabs up here if that's easier for you to see. I know some people really like that. So let's see, I do have a database here named Django Auth already created. And yeah, terminal renaming honestly is a huge sanity saver for me. And let's see. There we go. The /L tells us the different tables that are in this. Oh no, I'm still looking at that. Let's see here. What is it? Can someone remind me how to look at all the tables in a database in Postgres?
I think it's just /D, is it not?
It's /D.
I thought it. Yeah, I
It should be backslash.
so maybe there aren't any tables. Maybe there are no tables in this database. That actually might be why I keep saying did not find any relations. Because I'm connected to the database, so that sort of makes sense. So I probably was doing it right. And /? gives us a list of commands. And /D lists tables, views, and sequences. So DT, I think, lists tables. I don't think I have any tables created yet. And Michael, thank you, DT. And Kayla, no relations. Awesome. So I was getting a little stuck there, but we're good. That's actually exactly what we want because we haven't done anything yet. And so with Django Auth user. And then the next thing we have to run we have to run the migrate command, which we haven't talked a lot about, but this will initialize some stuff in our database that Django will then use for the user accounts because it's going to start storing stuff in there. And let me make sure I'm in the right spot here. Nope. So I want to go into the same directory where manage.py is, which is great. And let's do Python manage py migrate. It looks like a bunch of stuff just happened here, which hopefully is okay. We'll talk more about migrations later. They all go in this file and essentially are used to track when we make changes to our database schema so that we can kind of go back over time. And here in Postgres, let's see what we have if I do this now. So now we've got a whole bunch of tables. The auth user one looks kind of interesting. Let's take a quick look at that. So Django created this for us, just sort of for free. And we can see that it has some pretty useful looking fields with password, last login, is super user, username, first name, last name, email, so on and so forth. And let me briefly talk about the Django user model, because that's what we're going to use. There's not actually a ton of code that you have to write to implement this, and I think it will be helpful to talk a little bit about the class that we're going to use. So give me a moment to find. Yeah, the Django documentation is interesting on this stuff. Let's see what the best way to start talking about this is. I think I'll share a couple links, talk about them, add some notes, and then implement. So this kind of tells the story right here. Like Django has a user class, and it has a lot of amazing stuff for us kind of ready to go. And as we saw in that table, it has a lot of useful fields. And this is a user, this would be a model, right? Except we don't have to write this model. Django already has a model named user that we can use. It has a username, it has a first name, it has a last name, it has an email, it has a password. Django does all sorts of fancy stuff with this password. And even better, like it's already set up to be used with Postgres because this model already exists and that table's already created. And there are a lot of really useful built-in methods like set password. And here, if I search here for set password, here is, and this is, I think, one of the transitions now, like we're not going to have to go super in-depth on reading the documentation for the Django user model. It is really valuable to know that this documentation exists and is a reference. And I would highly recommend everyone to like bookmark this. And we should have it linked, but just in case not, I'm throwing it in the Zoom chat. And if someone can throw that in the Slack as well, that would be great. And I'll just throw this one in there too. And we're going to kind of hit the highlights of all the Django documentation, but it is good to have those resources. So this is where Django like does a lot of really great work for us, because set password, check password, has usable password, things like that all interact with this table that Django has already created. And Django does the work of encrypting and hashing the password. We didn't get a chance yesterday to kind of go through manually how to do that. And if we have time later this morning, we will. But in terms of how we actually use Django, we're going to want to leverage what Django already has. There are some other very useful methods in here, such as login, which is great. Let's see where the login one is. Oh, it's hiding somewhere around here. This is where the Django docs get a little funny. So authenticate is a great example of another method that Django gives us for free. And I mentioned this yesterday, but the context here is in settings.py. Let's go to installed apps. Yeah, and today I would say is not really a code along day for this lesson. So a Django app is just a whole bundle of functionality, right? And when we install Django, it comes with a lot of apps designed and built by the same people that built Django. And the Auth, short for authentication app, is the one that we're going to use, and that is super helpful. And there's a bunch of stuff in settings PY that's relevant to this. If I just search, if I do Command F and just search in settings PY for Auth, we can see all sorts of things. We see that Auth is installed as middleware, and middleware is code that gets run on every request before the request gets to our view functions. if we keep looking around here at auth, we see if we really want to go wild, Django lets us hook up some templates for authentication, login, logout stuff, and we won't look at that a ton, to be honest. Here we can see some validator rules for what is or isn't a valid password. I think Django applies these by default with the password field that we create, but to be honest, I would have to Google that to be sure. And they give us a link here, which is great, where we can read more about this if we want. And that's it. But so there's a lot of stuff that's covered there. And just kind of going through this stuff, we're not going to talk a lot about permissions and groups, but you can use that Django admin site to create users, delete users, to give users permissions to do certain things. There's a lot of very powerful stuff that you can do, but we're going to focus on the core of user accounts and logging in and logging out and writing stuff manually, which you end up having to do a lot of the time anyway. And also it's good for learning purposes. And kind of just continuing in that vein, like there are a lot of really nice things that we get for free with Django. I talked a little bit about sessions yesterday, and we didn't get to where we could implement a lot of that ourselves. But Django uses its built-in sessions code, its feature, for a lot of stuff related to user accounts. And whenever a request comes in, there will be a user object on it, and we can check to see if that exists, and we can check to see if that user is authenticated. And Django has a login function, which is great. And this is pretty much what we're going to do in a couple minutes, but you can kind of see what's going on here. We do have to import the authenticate and login functions from this module, Django contrib auth. We can see this is a view function right here. We can see that we're handling a post request, and we're grabbing the username and the password from the body of that post request that's been made to Django. And then we can call this authenticate function that will check and tell us, hey, does that user exist in our database or not? And then we can write some code to handle that. And if the user does exist and the password is valid, we can log them in. And if not, we do something else. So I just kind of wanted to give an overview of everything that Django gives us for free. And in a couple minutes, we'll start talking about how to implement it. I just want to check in and see what questions people have. Okay, awesome. And the other thing is, like these links are going to be good resources, and I've like kind of compiled out a couple of, like, the Django docs are a little messy, so I've kind of compiled the links that kind of take us right to what we want to look at. So if I don't, please remind me, and I'll share those links at the end of the class. So the kind of step back. Django has a built-in user model, which is very powerful. It has, the class has, I should say, like, the user. methods for pretty much everything that we would want, and I'll just put that link there. The tricky part is there are multiple ways to use Django's built-in user model. And I think now might be a good time to just start writing some code to start demonstrating some of this. So let me switch gears briefly and make sure that I've got my server running, and we'll go from there. And let's see if I can rename this. I can. Let's rename this to Django server. And let's put this up there. And let's do Python manage.py run server. And Michael, great question in the chat about where does django.contrib.auth.urls live. I'm pretty sure that anything starting with django.contrib, any module that we're importing stuff from, lives, it will be living essentially in the virtual environment directory. It gets installed along with Django. So that's a built-in Django thing. I'm not gonna like exactly follow the tutorial today also, so I would recommend not looking at it during this lesson, just FYI for people. Yeah, and excellent question about Django contrib auth. So let me do my sanity check right now and make sure that this is working. It looks good. Let me go ahead and change something here to make sure that it's still working. And it is, so we're great. So there's a couple ways to kind of go about building this kind of stuff. I think I will start by creating some paths and pages, and then we'll flesh out the features. So there are a couple things we're going to need to do. We're going to want to sign up or create a user. We're going to want to log in, and we might want one to log out, and we're going to want something. Eventually we'll need stuff to like create a blog post, view blog posts, and we'll get there. But let's start with sign up and logging in. And can someone just remind me, do I have that slash right? That's such a gotcha with Django.
I think it goes at the back.
Thank you. Thank you, Kevin. So let's create this sign up view function. And I don't think we need settings py, so I'm going to close that out. And
Put the comma.
the moment we don't need index.html. Yeah, did someone have a question?
Yeah, you forgot the comma in the URL.
Oh yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah, right there. There you go.
Yeah. And I started figuring out how to get rid of these squigglies, by the way, but I didn't quite get there. So I will follow up with people later because for me, that's a little annoying. One thing I did figure out is when you see this blue squiggly, it's complaining, well, I have this linter pilot installed, and it tells me I want a doc. This is a special kind of comment called a doc string that describes stuff. So if you have a linter installed and you see a blue squiggly or something saying, when you hover over it, missing function or method doc string, this is what it wants to see, just a comment. So I think what I'm going to do is create. I want something here so this works. So let's just call it signup.html. And I'm just going to be very lazy and do this over here and call this signup.html. And I'm just going to copy this index page and put it in the signup page and change this to signup. And now if I go here, we should have a signup page. So we haven't built any functionality here yet, but oh yeah, thank you folks. Linter is a term, they're great, honestly. It's an extension that you can install and you can like have it run on save and it'll fix like if you have two spaces when you should just have one or stuff is indented wrong. It fixes all that stuff. So we know here, I want to create my user. And I think at this point, normally I will try to kind of build like front to back and fake data as we go. The truth is that since what we're focusing on is like user accounts and login, there's not a lot of value to faking stuff right now. It makes more sense to just dive into the models. So the Django default user class is a little limited. We probably don't always want to use it directly. You can, but the approach that we're going to show is using the class that the user class inherits stuff from. So we recommend not using Django's user class model directly, but instead use the abstract user class.
I'm sorry, can you repeat why again?
Yeah. One moment, let me finish just typing. Yeah, and I think honestly, I might go to the Django docs here. Excuse all of my scrolling. So like honestly, this is if we were to just directly use the user class, it would look something like this, just to copy their code. And let's see, we need to import it. Yeah, and that's a great question, Icarus. And let me make sure that I have my import statement correct. Yeah, I had it slightly wrong. Let's fix that. And let's talk about why we don't want to do this. So this is how we would use the built-in Django user class. The short answer is almost always there will be things that we want to customize about our user class. And it's kind of difficult to do that using this default class directly to modify fields and things like that. They kind of go through it a little bit here. Let me see if they. Let's see
I've
if
been
they-
reading about the term scaffolding for this in the recent couple days here. Why is this not one of those things they more fully
Yeah,
build for us? It just seems silly to, if they give you all these tools, why don't they show you a common panel, or whatever the right word is?
so I mean, they do like, and maybe the best way to talk about the user class is to look at the definition a little bit. And stepping back a little bit, just at a high level, like there are different strategies for how you handle user accounts. For instance, sometimes you might want like a database table and a model for the user account that is just like the username and email and password. And then you would have another model that's like user information with like first name, last name, address, stuff like that. Because maybe that just makes more sense for our application. So basically, sometimes you might want to have like a user model that's really narrowly focused just on authentication and login. And other times you might want a user model that is bigger and has more stuff. And so it depends on the strategy that you want to use. Like in some ways, the default Django user model is great if you have like a very narrow user model. And you're connecting it to another one. And we sort of mentioned that in the content for the curriculum lesson, and they talk about it here, and they call it the proxy model strategy. What we'll see is that it's not that bad using the abstract user class, because we still get all of these same functions. Like we get login, we get logout, we get authenticate, we get everything important. But it is actually, I think, a little easier to manually set some stuff, because the other piece of the puzzle is that it's kind of like what they're giving us here is like a very fancy Lego kit, I guess. So they're giving us tools and like different ways of using these tools. Like here is a good example, like the user first name on the Django default model has to be 150 characters or fewer. There's first name and last name. What if for our application, we just want a name field and we don't want to separate first name and last name? Well, in that case, we're out of luck. And so that's where using a custom user model makes life easier. There are some special things around username versus email that I'll talk about in a second that apply as well. There's, those are the main ones. Honestly, it's for flexibility. And I think once I show the code for how to do this, it actually won't be so bad. And I'm curious if I can find the abstract user class. Yeah, it's always hard to find the right thing in Django docs. I think I'm just going to drive forward and write the code. And Mariko, great question. Abstract user absolutely does have to do with object-oriented programming, and it inherits everything. The user class actually inherits everything from it, the user model rather. And let's see if I can find. Yeah, let's see if we can look at abstract base user. Yeah, with object-oriented programming, it gets pretty gnarly. Like there's a class named abstract base user, and the user class inherits that class. And there's another class like abstract user that inherits from this as well. But this abstract base user class has most of the stuff that we want. Here we go, abstract user. So this is the one that we're going to use, and again, I think it'll be much easier to show this. Right now, this is mostly context. Yeah, I don't think it's going to be useful for me to walk through the model definition. I think what'll make more sense is to just show the implementation, and I think that will kind of answer people's questions. And in fact, this VS Code pop-up description is kind of great and describes it really well, right? This is a base class that the user class inherits. So yeah, Mariko, you're spot on about object-oriented programming. And it has a fully featured user model with everything we care about for admin and login and logout. And the difference is that the only fields that are required are username and password, and everything else is optional, and we can kind of change. So it's just a little more flexible for us to build our own user model like this. And it's going to look something like this. So we are creating an app user class that's going to inherit from this abstract user class. And we're going to want to give an email field. And we don't need to give all of these properties. In fact, I think I'll put a little note here, optional argument. And max length, probably we want that to be 255 characters. And we do want the email field to be unique. That one is important for users, and that needs to be a capital T. So this is if our user is active or not. And VS Code got a little too clever there. And I want this to default to true, because we're going to, and this is a design decision. Like you could imagine if you wanted to verify an email address before the user could log in, which I know we've all experienced, then we would set this default to false, right? However, for our program, we just want it so that once the account is created, the user is ready to go. And the password field is built into abstract user, so we don't have to define it. And we do have to, so we have an option. Django cares about for Django, the username field is special for user models. So we have a choice. It's what's used for login. If we just want to use email for login and not require a username, we have to tell Django to treat the email field like the username field. And this is relatively straightforward because Django, again, has built in for us a very friendly way to do this. And we can add some required fields, and we'll just have that be nothing for the moment. So there is one other thing that we have to do. Because we're not using the Django built-in user model, we do have to go to settings.py. And we have to find a variable called auth user model. And if it doesn't exist, we have to create it. And we can just put it anywhere and say auth user model equals log dot app user. Let me close this out for a second. So let's recap kind of the steps to do this, because I just wrote a bunch of code. So we set up Postgres. Next, we won't create our user model. We will probably want to create a custom user model, which means inherit from abstract user. And then we want to specify if we are using the email field instead of the username field. And then specify in settings py the name of the model we are using for user accounts. So I think I might flesh this out a bit, but I also think just having this code as a guide hopefully will be helpful. And so just to kind of recap that, we're creating this app user, we're inheriting from this class abstract user. This also lets us add more fields to this if we wanted to, which I don't think we could do with just the Django user class. There are other strategies for doing this, but this is like a good middle of the road approach. We do have to specify if we don't want to use the username field. Oh, that needs to be an equal sign. And then in settings.py, we have to, let's see here, final new line missing. Oh, that should easy fix. We have to specify this auth user model variable in settings py to the name of the model that we are going to be using. And actually this might need to be, I want to say log app, because it probably needs to be the name of the app. And we'll see if that breaks or not. If something breaks when we run this code, this will be the first place to check. What questions do people have about the code that we just wrote, and what would be some good things to go over before we test it?
Hey, Adam, I have a quick question about the is active code that we wrote.
Yeah.
You were saying that when the default is set to false, that verifies the email address before the account is created. And if it's set to true, then that immediately pretty much allows the email address to be used when the account is created.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I was sharing that more as an example of one way we might use this is active property. Let's actually Google and see exactly what this does, because I am not 100%. And also, it's good practice now that we're at this point. Like we'll want to refer to the user model. Like this stuff gets complex enough where we are going to have to like start looking at the Django documentation more and more. So looking at this property is active, which is a Boolean field on our model. Really what it's saying is that this is a way for us to say if a user account is active or not. And what Django recommends is that instead of like deleting a row in our table and deleting that particular user data, we just set this to false. And you'll see that pattern in a lot of production applications because we might want to save that data or a user might want to reactivate their account. This is also where reading the docs starts to become more important. Like there's this sentence here, this doesn't necessarily control whether or not the user can log in, which can be really confusing. Django probably does some stuff with is active. And to be honest, I would have to kind of read through these docs to see exactly what it does. This is also a good example, by the way, of like sometimes this stuff is complex enough where just ignoring it is the better path for a while. Like if we don't really need to do a lot with this is active field, in some ways, like we can make our lives easier by just ignoring it. We could set it to false. The nice thing about setting it to true is we know for sure like Django won't try and stop us from doing anything. So there was a great question, Michael, in the chat, like why don't we just do this? And the reason is that, so this app user class is special for Django. Everything in this models.py field is going to be connected to a database table through psychopg2. And that's why we call it like, this is the app user model. And in fact, I should add a doc string there. App user model, user accounts. And so I don't know exactly what this models class does, but I know like effectively what it's doing. Like we're not literally setting this is active field to false. We're telling Django, hey, on this class, there is a property named is active. It will be a Boolean whose value can be true or false. And I want you to create a column in Postgres on the app user table for it. So like, and that's why we use this method because we can set a default value. Like if, and there's a lot of other things that we can do as well. I'm not sure what for Booleans, to be honest. But the big takeaway here is like, when you use a framework like Django, you kind of have to do it the Django way, because I don't know exactly what Django is doing under the hood here. I just know that I don't want to run into a problem by not having that happen. And models.email field is a good example of where there's a lot of specific things we can do here that we couldn't do. So I think the way to think about it is that like Boolean field is just like another model field that we're creating. And there's an advantage to using the same interface for everything. Like it'd be a little weird if for all the other model fields, we did models dot something, and then for Boolean, we just did true. Honestly, that would just be more confusing. So there's a value to like a consistent approach. Yeah, that's a great question, and I hope that context was helpful, Michael. And I think the moment of truth now, honestly, is running this code. Like we've done all this stuff. Now I need to make the migration, run it, test it. So let me open up a terminal. And let me do git status. And I need to follow my own advice here and commit stuff. So git add week 7, day 2, Django login auth. Okay, and now I feel happy. And I don't have to worry about losing my code. And if I do something and I need to go back in time, I can. And let me navigate back into the project directory where manage.py is. And someone remind me, once I like create a model and add some stuff, what are the migration commands that we need to run again to update the model and create the to update the database and create a migration and apply it?
So I believe that's Python manage py make migrations. And
Yeah.
then you're going to migrate after.
Thank you. Yeah, I think so as well. Awesome. And so what should happen here is we run this make migration step. We should see a migration file be created, which will be interesting to look at. And then when we run the migrate command, we should be able to see the changes in our database. And to kind of refresh ourselves on the current state of our database, we have all these tables. There is no app user table because we haven't created it yet. And so that's the one we'll be interested in looking at when we do. And actually, let me add this to our notes as well. Create our user model, create and run migrations so that our user, we create database table and connect it to our use model. And by the way to run two commands at one right after the other on the command line is separated by a double ampersand. But I like to do it one at a time, because if we run into an issue, we'll get an easier error message. So that's great. It looks like this model was created. And if I go here to the migrations directory, I can double check. And this is looking good. There's a whole lot of interesting stuff here. Let's see, is active. Yeah, and Michael, to answer your question, this is part of why we have to define is active this way too, because when these Python migration files are, it's not straight up SQL, it's Python code. So that's kind of how like Python stores and Django keeps track of this stuff and like turns it into SQL in like a programmatic, repeatable way. And this is kind of interesting to look at just to peek under the hood a bit. And now let's do Python manage py migrate. And not incredibly surprisingly, I ran into a problem. And let's see what this problem is. And the context here is when I was setting this up before class, I might have ran the migrate command when I still had the database set to be SQLite, which could be the problem here. So let's take a moment and look at this error message and debug. Migration admin 001 initial is applied before its dependency blog app 001 initial on database default. Okay, so to kind of interpret this, this is saying, hey, there are two migration files or commands, and one of them seems to depend on the other, and they're running in the wrong order. So I'm curious to see if we can see this admin migrate command. Yeah, so there's really kind of two ways to tackle this. I think the simplest way, honestly, is to just let's completely delete this database. Taylor, that's a great question. I'm not sure if we have to delete the 001 file or not. I'm just gonna delete.
Isn't it true if you delete that file, you just have to rerun your migration, don't you? There's also like a stack or a smash command that will smash them all together.
There is a smash command. Deleting the migration is a step. The real problem would be like, I might have run Python manage py migrate before class, before I had changed the database engine to Postgres. Though that would not have messed up Postgres per se. Let's see. Yeah, before I delete this, let's try running the specific migration file. Can someone remind me, how do I run a specific migration?
Just migrate with the app name.
Yeah, log app, and then I think I also need the migration number, correct?
No, I don't think you need the migration number.
Hmm,
Adam, there might be I don't know why this works, but I had the same error. And when I commented out, Django.contrib.admin installed apps under settings, under the project settings. And comment out the path to the admin and the URLs and then run it.
yeah,
It made migrations and then you can uncomment it afterwards. I don't know.
that's a great piece of advice, Jaden, thank you. And that makes sense, because this error message is telling us that admin one is being applied before this other one. I think what I want to do is the power of the Google and see what the internet says. Yeah, so part of the backstory here is Django stores some migration related stuff in the database. There's a Django migrations table. And it looks like they're saying deleting Django migrations table, then perform Python manage py make migrations plus this again. Cameron, thank you for the link as well. Let's see what they suggest here. And this is exactly what you were saying, Jaden, about commenting stuff out. I think yeah, I think I want to just drop the database and maybe delete all the migrations and start fresh and see how that works. So let me quit here, Postgres, drop database, Django, auth. Is being accessed by other users. Oh, the Django server is running and talking to it. Let's try that again. Okay. Awesome. So that Django auth database is now gone. I want to double check how to delete all migrations. Because there's a little bit of data that I think might get stored in that like PyCache file. Let's see, delete migrations folder, delete from Django migrations. Yeah. So I think the right thing to do is just delete this migrations folder entirely, because I don't know exactly what's in this PyCache directory, but cache means like saved stuff. I don't want anything saved. So let's go ahead and delete that. Now let's create database Django auth. So we should have a fresh database. And if this doesn't work, I'm gonna take your advice, Jaden. And there should be no tables. And now. Oh, Sam, I see you saying in the chat that Django doesn't like a model inheriting from abstract users after the initial migration. Yeah, I think that sounds right, and I might need to change that order of operation in our notes. So first we want to run the make migrations command. No changes detected does not seem right.
So, hey, can we stop for just a second? I have a question. And so let's just imagine the real world. We think we might want to run through the exercise you're doing right now. We're having troubles. The
Yeah.
database might get screwed up. We do something wrong.
Yeah,
Where does this, who makes this decision, and how do you safely accomplish what it is you want to accomplish without whacking the whole system?
yeah. The answer is you don't do development against the production database. Like you use the migration files to build your own database on your own machine with some fake data, and you use that during development. And then if you have to delete the whole thing and start fresh, it only affects you and not like the real application in production with users. Because you're totally right, Jim, that like on a database with real data being used by users, we have to be a lot more cautious about running migrations and or rolling back with migrations. You can do both, but both you have to be more careful about, because you can't just like drop the database if everything goes wrong. Yeah, there also sometimes will be like test environment databases, so that like, especially if there's larger amounts of data and you might be working against that. And like at places I've worked, like if one person or one group of people has like a particularly important project, they might kind of lay claim to the test database while they're working on it and developing stuff. And everyone else just kind of knows that the test database may be like being constantly destroyed and remade and stuff. Yeah, generally speaking, you'll either have a local database or a test database. Yeah, and I think, let's see here. So the next issue here, Django, no migrations detected. So there is almost definitely something cached that I forgot to delete. Make migrations. Oh, I have to specify the app name. That would be the reason why. Log app. There we go. So let's cross our fingers and try this again. Okay, that worked. That was great. I think the big takeaway, folks, is honestly a lot of the times when I start to run into trouble, I just delete the whole database and start again. And with migrations, sometimes early in the process, you can delete the whole migrations file. a bit later in the process, you might not want to do that, but that probably means you have some good migrations already, and you just need to like delete the most recent migration file that you made. And then I think also the other takeaway here is this needs to not be there. And Sam, I think you were right that the problem there was like using the abstract user class. So it didn't like something with that, clearly. So I think the next step is let's look at the database. Let's see what we have. Let's wrap this up by writing a quick test file to create some users and confirm that that works. And then we'll take a break. And then when we come back, we'll see how to connect this for login and everything like that. So over here, I want to connect to the Django, or I should be connected to the Django Auth database already. And we've got blog app user, which is our model that we created. And let's see here. Let's try just D. Yeah, Michael, I'd be happy to try DT plus. Oh, that's awesome. I did not know that. That's very cool. So there's a lot of interesting metadata about the table. And then I think just the D for description gives us, yeah, the full Monty for our column. So just to recap, here is our model, which is pretty straightforward. The magic really is that we are inheriting from abstract user. And here is the table in the database that's created to store information for that model. And we can see all sorts of nice things that Django added for us: an ID, a password field, the last time that it was logged in, if this person is an admin or not, the username, which we might not use. They did go ahead and add first name and last name, but it's optional. And then the email address and some other stuff. So it's not radically different from using Django's default user field. I do think this is a good approach. It's much easier to build on this. Like, you don't want to start with the Django default user model and then like halfway into your program realize that you really want to add some stuff, but that you can't. I think the next step is to write a simple test file and create some users. And so I think, or even better, let's just have, let's go to our view code for sign up, and let's make this a very manual process. From, let's see, models, import app user. I think that's the way to do it. And let's see here. Yeah, so there's a couple, it's kind of two ways to do it. It's not really critical to do it one way or the other, but because app user inherits from Django user model, we can use all of user models existing methods. And so this is how we create a user. I think that should do it. And let's try email equals test user@gmail.com and password equals 123. And we probably should put this in a try catch block. Something probably won't go wrong, but if it does, we can have a nice message. Let's see what variable E doesn't conform to. Yeah. Except. We'll just do that. And let's see here, common base class names. As let's just call it maybe user creation exception. I know I get a little obsessive about names, but I want that word sign up. So it reminds me to go back to this method here. And I'm not sure what this little squiggly is complaining about. Oh, some trailing white space. So we should be good here. Let's go ahead and let's print. Some user information. We'll print the password, which should be hashed. I don't think we'll get the actual password value. I definitely recommend using really simple values for passwords. Let's see what this squiggly here doesn't like. Also trailing white space. And we might as well send this. Well, we'll worry about sending back user information on data once we get this working. I just want like a really simple sign up method. Let's see here, missing method or doc string. Great user. Awesome. So fingers crossed, the next step would be to actually run the server. Let's see here. No module name models. So that should be a relatively easy fix. I think this just needs to be. Let's close you out and you out and you out. So this needs to just be dot models, I believe, because we need to just tell Python to look for models from the same directory. And let me make sure I have my names right. App user. Yeah, I need to fix. VS Code isn't quite sent up right with the linter. So these twigglies are annoying, and we'll find a time to talk about that because the linter is a great thing to have set up, but it's also nice to have it configured properly. So now our server is running, which is great. And let's test it out with the homepage. And let me open up DevTools just so we can see we shouldn't get any errors. And now let's sign up. And what we're going to want to watch is right here. Hopefully we'll see some user information. So this is the kind of error you want to have. Variable user referenced before assignment. This is telling me that I used a variable before it was created. And it's telling me that it happened on line. If I scroll all the way down here, line 21, in my signup code, user email. So I've got this user variable here. And then I get this error here. What's the problem here? Can someone help me out?
Never goes to, if the user isn't assigned in the try block, then it's not going to have a user variable. So it's outside of the scope.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Like when this view function is run, it goes into the try block and the user is created here, and we might have access to it outside the scope in some fashion, but we really shouldn't do this because really the try block is our happy path, right? This is success. And we only want to display and print this stuff out on the happy path. And in fact, we might have had an exception thrown and not seen it because it seemed like the code got to this print statement, but we didn't see user information. And in fact, if we go here, we do get a system error message, the same one. So let's see if that resolves it. There might still be something to fix. And what I'm going to do too is just be very practical and just have two return statements, one in the try and the accept, and they both do the same thing. But here, we would want to return an error message of some sort to the user. So let's try this again and see how it goes. So that seemed to work, which is great. And Michael in the chat, exactly. If there's no user, print no user. Let's look at our server code and see what happens. It does look like sign up failed. It looks like right here it says missing one required positional argument username, which I will be completely honest, I thought that username should be optional. However, it doesn't seem to like that. So
If we're using abstract user, can't we just make it optional? Is that possible?
yeah, that is a great question. I would have thought it's optional by default. And I suppose actually a good starting point is looking in the database. And yeah, so username, it says not null, so it's not allowed to be null. So you might be right. I might have missed that step where we need to specify that the username field is optional. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a username. I just want to confirm this code is working, and then we'll try making it optional. And I saw someone had a question. Louis, yes, sir.
Yeah, I got a question. If username is not null, I also saw like a whole bunch of stuff was also not null. Does that mean that you need to use those also like first name and last name?
That is a great point.
Because I see it's not null as well. The only thing that's not null is super user. So do you
Yeah,
also have to use all that is that they join email, all that?
yeah, you may be correct. You very well may be right. Let's run this and see. There's a little bit like, our Django is doing some stuff with the model between when we create it and save it. So it could be filling in some of those fields, but I really doubt it would fill in first name or last name. So there's a very good chance that you're right. I'm going to go ahead and clear the terminal, and let's try the sign up endpoint again and see what happens. So that is interesting because Louis, I was kind of with you, and it'll be interesting to see what is put in there. My guess is that Django put in an empty string for us. For first name and last name. Like I was saying before, username is kind of a special field with everything related to like user models in Django. So it may be required, or it might be that we could set it to be optional in the model. We can see. Zach, great question about what is this stuff, like is super user, is staff, and stuff like that. The answer is like, you can use Django to set up pretty sophisticated permission systems. Like if you wanted to create a content management network, like where people could create blogging accounts and like create and edit blogs, you could use the Django auth system to set up pretty sophisticated permissions and then manage a lot of that through Django admin so that I could edit my own blog posts, but not other people's. We don't show a ton of that in the class. And honestly, I recommend doing it manually for the most part, because I think that, at least to start out with, that's how you're going to learn the most. It's kind of a balance between how much Django magic do you want to use. Like, it'll be great if we get to look at how to like write our own code to like save and hash a password and do stuff with sessions. But in terms of like doing work with Django, we want to use Django's built-in stuff. In some ways, I think the permissions and the template system is a little bit too much magic. So the good news is users created. Note that that password was saved to the database. And when we print it out, Django isn't going to show us the actual plain text value of that password. And if we look in our database, select star from log app user and select, I need to spell the right way. It's a little hard to see. So in fact, instead of star, let's do maybe password. So the password isn't even saved in the database. We've used a hashing algorithm. So Django has an algorithm that will take a password and like apply some math to it and convert it into this. But Django can also convert it back. And that happens with the authenticate function, which we'll take a look at after our break. However, for security reasons, you never, ever want to store like an actual password value in the database, because, you know, God forbid if someone malicious like hacked into the database, this way at least they don't actually get actual passwords. And like when you folks hear about like data breaches, like there was one a bunch of years ago with CSV or Target or something, there's one all the time. Sadly, there are way too many companies out there that do store like passwords in plain text in the database. And you'll also note that like there's probably some way for us to write the code to get the actual password value, but that's not really what Django is set up for. Like in theory, I'm pretty sure, like, because the password should also be protected from us, the programmers. I don't know if any of you heard about like Uber spying on people, but they were doing a lot of spying on people essentially. So part of sort of like the ethics of software development is like a lot of user data is private, and we don't even want the programmers to see it. You know what I mean? If you're using something, you don't necessarily want all the software engineers to be able to see your password for stuff. So that's how this stuff is designed too. And if we have time, we'll get into that a bit more, but the main thing is using it. So I think now is a great time to check in for maybe some questions and review, and then we'll take a break, and then we'll set up login and log out and connecting the pieces with some fancier views and maybe some form fields and stuff. But yeah, what are on people's minds, and what questions do people have about some of this code, or parts that it would be good to go over?
Maybe for now, can you go through the flow of,
Yeah.
of the whole
Yeah.
program?
Yeah,
On the way?
that's a great call. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Yeah, let's look at the flow. That's a very good call. And right now the flow is relatively, like, there's not a lot that we're doing in the browser. The sign up page really doesn't, like, the view doesn't do much. The template rather. So if I have this sign up page here and the home page does nothing, remember the home page, all it does is say hello. So, and right now we're not even passing any information from the browser to the server. This is really just to kind of help us test things. So I make this HTTP GET request to the sign up route. And let's trace this through our program. And I'm going to go ahead and close some stuff out. And actually, it'll be really cool to trace this through. I think this will be a lot of fun. So what actually happens when Django gets an HTTP request is before it even gets to like urls.py and our URL patterns here, it goes through what's called middleware, which is a bunch of functions that do stuff to the request. Like that's what turns the request from like raw text sent over the internet into an instance of the request class into an object. That's also where if you're already logged in, the authentication stuff is applied. That's where session stuff is applied for request.session. It might do some stuff with cookies as well. The CSRF stuff, the cross-site request forgery protection. So we haven't gone into depth into this stuff. I think the most important thing to know is just that this stuff happens before the HTTP request gets to us. And so that GET request comes here. Django looks at this first path, admin, it says that does not match. We had /signup. And then it looks at this next path with it, which is everything. And Django says that does match. What should I do? And this include statement basically executes this whole other URLs py file. So Django says, let's go look over here inside blog app in this other URLs py file. And let's see which paths match. I'm not sure that I should have this one first, actually. I'm not sure if that makes a critical difference. But it looks like Django figured it out because it didn't go to index. So Django said, hey, that route sign up, that matches this path. Let me call this function. And that squiggly is wrong because it does exist and it worked. So Django then goes here in the blog app directory and calls our sign up view function where we create a user. And this is where, again, like we're not getting any real data from the browser yet. We just wanted to test out our server-side code. And we have a try catch block, and you want to use the try catch block for things like talking to a database or talking to third-party APIs where, you know, what if I forgot to start the database? That would like break everything, right? So the try catch block handles that. Like for things where our code is interacting with some other service that could cause a problem, we want to wrap it in a try catch block so that we could handle that exception and like return a website back to the user and they wouldn't just see a really unfriendly error message. So our code goes into this try catch block. And the truth is we're not even doing anything with this request right now. You know, what we should be doing is it should look something like this. I think request dot, let's see. I don't know. This is not right. But this is where we're going to go after the break. And we use, I should double check why we have to go through this objects property to call this method actually, because I'm not 100% sure why. But I'm pretty sure that we do have to. and it might be related to the way that different classes are inherited in Django. So here we're using our app user model. And as we discovered, we need to pass it a username, we need to pass it an email, and we need to pass it a password. And we call this create user method. And let's take a look at this app user model. So this is our models py file in blog app, and this is the app user that we defined. And here, again, the magic is from this abstract user class that we inherit that gives us the full Django user model class with all these really great functions for authentication and login and stuff. And we really just defined the email and is active and username. This is also why now is the time to push yourself to start to really dig into Django, even if it slows you down, because this create user method, like there's not going to be anywhere in the code that you can really go to see where what that does. You have to know that that's connected to the Django user model. And if I need to review that, I have to go to the Django docs, right? And I have to find, is this the user model? I think this is the user model. In any case, somewhere around here, like I have to, the Django docs now start to become our source of truth for some of these methods. And let's see here, going back to our view function. And do people have questions about this app user model while we're looking at this actually and walking through the flow of that HTTP request? Yeah, so this is the one gotcha. This is the one important bit right here. If you don't add this, Django will complain in a way that might not be intuitive, even though we still needed to pass the username, which did catch me by surprise. So Django has gone ahead and created a user. And this create user method, I think, saves it to the database. And this is where we need to look at the docs. Yep. So it creates the user model, it saves it to the database, and then it returns it. So that's very good to know that user model instance gets saved here.
Adam, could you go back down under is active?
Yeah, totally. This part of the app user model.
Yeah, I guess I didn't see where when we had put in the username field and the required fields.
Yeah, totally. And I'll push all this code up right after at lunch as well. Darius, yes, sir.
Yes, in this in the app user class, can't we just set like the username to email in a way? So it would like handle that that username error in our views.
That's a great question. You mean something like username equals email, essentially?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a really good question. There are a couple issues with that. One of them is about how Django models work, and the other is about specifically with the Django user model. So let me start with the Django user model, because I think that one is more straightforward. The Django user model treats username in a special way because that's what it looks at for logging in and authentication and stuff. So we like, you think about, when you type your username and password into a website to log in, and sometimes you can type in your email, sometimes you have to type in a username. If we want the user to be able to like use their email to log in, we have to tell Django that. We have to tell Django to treat email like the username field. Because specifically for logging in and stuff like that, username kind of has like a special meaning and is used in a certain way. Did that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a really good question. And that is definitely, I think, one of the gotchas with using the Django user model. It's the good news is it's an easy fix because it's just one line. And if we wanted to require a username, we just could do that. We don't need to do this. The other part to your question about why this doesn't work that's specific to Django models is the thing to remember about this class is that it's treated in a special way because it's used to create database tables. And
Okay, so
migrations.
it's sorry, is it like going to abstract user class first and then it goes to app user? Is that like why? Like if you don't have a username and before it gets to abstract user, it can't like I guess go to app user because of that error.
Say that again.
So like when we like make a user, isn't it going to abstract user first to that database and its requirements, and then it's going to our app user, and then it's like the requirements we create there?
Yes, exactly. That's yeah. Pretty much it looks at abstract user. And I'm not sure exactly where in the Django docs that lives, but the Django docs basically say it is the same thing as the user model. So looking at their specification for this user model is going to kind of where we can see everything that is created. And you're absolutely right, because this app user class inherits from this abstract user class, it creates all those fields, and then all of this stuff that we get kind of gets applied on top of it and changes stuff. And that's why if we don't have this at all, there will still be a username. The last reason why this doesn't work for a model specifically for Django models is because I think the thing to remember is each of these fields is probably getting turned into a database table. This might work. I have not tried this before, but I would say that you don't want to do it because you want to be really explicit in your code here. And I'm not certain that it would work. Like that app user model was used to create this app user migration file. And this specifies each of these fields, right? And so is Django smart enough? Like if we did this, is Django smart enough to turn it into that or something else? I'm not sure, to be honest. And then even if it does, will Django be smart enough then when it creates the database to turn it into this? Again, I'm not sure. And again, that's a little specifically to like a Django model class. Like if this was like a normal class, it would be a little easier. And you can do stuff like this. Like sometimes you can have methods, you can kind of stick whatever you want on a class. But if it's a field that like is something that we want to store in the database, then what you want to do is use this models dot something field command to make sure that we're creating this field the way that Django wants to, so it can create a migration file and then create like the column in that database table. Was that useful context as well about what's going on there?
Yes, sir, it was. Thank you.
Definitely. Yeah, that was a great question, man. Thank you for asking. Because that touched on a couple really good things. And again, this might actually work. I'm not sure. And there are things like we can do. You can add stuff onto models and make them more complex. We haven't really seen that. But a good rule of thumb with models, honestly, is to keep it simple and keep it explicit because it makes it a little easier to debug and read and work with. Yeah, what other questions do people have about this app user model while we're looking at it? And these are great questions, folks. Thank you. Cool. Yeah, I think the big thing here with Django, and this is going to be true with React too, like we're learning it in pieces. It's this really complex tool. Again, the analogy I would use is like, if you want to fly an airplane, that takes a lot longer to learn than driving a car, but you get a lot farther. So, right, Django, it's really meant for going long distances, for building bigger sites, right? And that's why it feels like a lot of work to learn it, because we're not really building big sites with it where all of a sudden this helps us from having to do the same thing like a dozen times over. So there is some unnecessary steps, but it's really valuable to learn because this is the tool that you would be using in the industry or a very similar one. So to kind of like recap our flow, we had this sign up HTTP request come in. It went from the other URLs PY into the URLs PY file with the URL patterns for our blog app. And then it took us into the sign up method. And we just kind of walked through what's going on with creating a user, which is awesome, and saving it to the database. And we just print that user information out to the terminal. And in fact, I will find the sign up page and let's refresh it and watch that information print again. Oh, and this is great. Actually, this is a great example of the kind of stuff to be mindful of. So sign up failed. Duplicate key violates unique constraint. The username test user already exists. So my code is good. My code is great, but it just won't let me create the same user with the same username or the same email over and over and over. Because, and I just have this hard coded in. So the easy fix is you just change the name, or honestly, you go into Postgres and you delete that row. And now if we do this, sign up should work. We should see that message. Our user is created. And over here, we have now called the render function, which is just, and this sign up HTML is just really saying hello right now. And that's the full flow. So let's take a break. It's 10:48. That was a deep dive. I apologize for not taking a break earlier, and I hope that's okay. Please do definitely like remind me if it's break time and I'm kind of a little too in the zone. Why don't we take 20 and come back at like 11:10, and then we'll set up login and authentication and stuff. Sound good? Awesome. Thank you, folks.